Direct from Taos, New Mexico, it's the To Walk with Giants podcast with indie comic book creator Cody Fernandez and indie musical artist Christopher Messick.
Howdy, folks. I'm Cody with To Walk with Giants and Ironverse Comics, joined by the ever incredible
Christopher Messick, aka Laguna Munta, doing that original music thing.
Oh, that is a thing. Today we're talking about the giant known as Boundaries. Ooh. Maybe we'll get to some fences, some gates, some doors, but we're talking about it more in the larger sense, I think. So I guess
philosophically, if you will.
Maybe they won't though, so maybe we shouldn't ask. Hopefully. So, boundaries, huh? I don't know. I'll let you start. I think I usually do.
Yeah, well, I have a few thoughts on boundaries.
Excellent.
One of the first is I think it's the job of artists to push the boundaries, and that is to kind of take things a little bit further. And that's just in every sense within the medium, whatever medium you work in, try new things that haven't been done before. Kind of, this is how things are revolutionized. This is how progress is made with technologies in the arts or techniques in the arts or just art in general. The idea of art can be expanded by pushing boundaries. So that's one aspect of art that I immediately thought of. And I think it's the duty of every artist to sort of push the boundaries.
Well, most of what I found is more about personal boundaries, but this one does still apply to what you were talking about. This is from T.S. Eliot, famous, I believe, poet and writer. If you do not push the boundaries, you will never know where they are.
Yes, exactly. You can never really know how far you could take something until you try it. And a lot of great creators do that, and that's really those are some of the things that really stick out in our minds, is that, like the George Lucas he comes up a lot. You know why? Because he's great and he did a lot of great things. He pushed the boundaries. Him and his production company and ILM, everything they did, it pushed the boundaries of what films were, and really has created a whole new genre, and it has changed films entirely, how they're made even. So that's him definitely pushing the boundaries and succeeding at it. And
someone else I recommend that was definitely a boundary pusher was George Carlin in his comedy.
Yeah,
that's a big one, because I was trying to think, like, there are some people who push. We used to call them edgelords. I'm sure we still use that. There are some people who push boundaries just to be an asshole, and then there are some that push boundaries to expand a medium. And as you mentioned, George Lucas, wonderful example for cinema. George Carlin, for me, wonderful example for comedy, where some people did take it as being an asshole, but when you actually look to it, there was a strong message, and there was most certainly a point to it, particularly in what was acceptable language. That was his whole point, is like, all of it should be acceptable and it should be precise, and he enjoyed playing with that and would present it very directly to his audience, and generation after generation related to that curmudgeon-y old hippie.
Oh yeah, he's beloved
for doing just that. Another famous one that always comes to mind, Hunter S. Thompson, created a whole different type of journalism, and was doing it from a perspective of self exploration, and making sure that you actually understand what you're writing about in some form, even if the attempt to understand it was the best you could understand it. And those are definitely massive boundary pushers that in their time, quite controversial, but have since left a legacy of pushing those boundaries. Now that gate, that play bin is just that little bit larger for many others to go ahead and try in there. Richard Pryor, another wonderful boundary pusher.
Right. Well, I think especially comedians, it's kind of their job.
Yes.
How, and I think it was Lenny Bruce who said that the comedian or the audience will tell you how far things can go. The audience is intelligent. They know how far things can go, and they'll let you know.
What's the guy? Michael Richards. He pushed it in a very poor way. and
Yeah,
is now, that's what his legacy is now because of that, because there was no
which is
subtlety in
unfortunate.
it, it was just frustration, right? And so that's also part of the difference, is understanding how to push a boundary artistically and not just, again, to be an
Right,
asshole just for shock,
right.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and another and
prank channels also on YouTube. That's a big one where they're pushing some nasty boundaries a lot of the time, just to be, again, an
yeah,
asshole and farm views. And
right,
that's the other side of it, where it's like, well, yeah, you're pushing a boundary that's there for a reason, not so much there for, oh, I don't know, conventional language sake, or conventional artistic sake. Like, well, this is what's safe.
right.
It's like
Well,
that's unsafe
you should
and
you
me.
shouldn't you shouldn't push a boundary that's going to lessen you.
There you go. I like
You
that.
know,
I like
don't
that.
disrespect yourself in
Yeah.
the pushing of boundaries.
Oh well.
Don't
Here's another one. Tom Green. That was his whole career, was pushing boundaries that lessened himself, and it didn't last as long as it could have, to be fair, but it went somewhere, didn't
yeah,
it?
but I very much enjoy Tom Green's
Exactly.
some of his stuff is pretty entertaining.
That's been
But
Jackass, right? That's a whole genre as
yes,
well.
exactly. Yes.
So yes, it can. But that's even doing it again artistically, right? And
Right.
with taste, and not just a blunt self-important kind of instrument. I think a lot of those it's very ego based and not so much artistically
Yeah.
based.
Well, and that's something that came up in SCTV. I was watching the behind the scenes footage, and one of the original creators and sort of producers of the show, I can't remember his name at the moment. I wish I did. He was speaking about it, and he was saying that all the bits and the skits and everything was written to serve the show. It wasn't
Mm.
written to serve the individual. It wasn't written to serve, if you and I were on the
Yes.
cast. I wasn't gonna. The bits weren't written so I could be better than you.
Mm.
No, no. The bits need to be written well so that the show overall, as a whole, excels. And they were saying that it was basically the opposite over at SNL. It was basically this just kind of cutthroat mentality where they were just trying to write the best stuff and sort of bury everybody else and be the best. But but like you said, that's kind of the attitude, is just building towards something great and creating a great piece of art instead of just being very self-centered and very self-focused on it. And typically, the people who positively push boundaries are just in love with what they're doing, like your Jimi
Hmm.
Hendrixes or your Eddie Van
Yes.
Halens.
Yes.
These
Well,
guys love what they're doing.
and go back, even though Jackass did start with usually I'm Johnny Knoxville, and right,
Right.
everybody else in the cast got plenty of time, and everybody got fucked with. Everybody was
Right.
part of that manifestation of, and I'm gonna call it art. It was a very unique kind of art, but
It's
it was
art.
art.
It's art.
And it's that's the bit, right? It still had a front man, quote unquote, but it was still expressed as an artistic piece.
Right. Well, he's kind of the captain of the ship.
That's
He's the leader.
right. Yes,
He's the leader, and he leads
exactly.
by example.
That's the
And
bit too.
all the stupid shit he does, or all the stupid shit he would expect people to do, he would do.
That's the important part, and that's the. I mean, you said talking about boundaries, but leadership's another wonderful one I'd love to get into at some point. But that's the big part of leadership is by example, and I've seen so many
Right.
times where it's by control, by fear, by ego, and that kind of ship is bound to sink. Um,
And and a leadership requires boundaries. Just
that's
based on what we were
good.
just saying, it's
Yep.
like a good leader will show respect through boundaries. Meaning, and just like Johnny, if Johnny Knoxville is our example, if he expects these dudes to do the stupid stunts that are dangerous, he has to be willing to do them too, and therefore he
Mhm.
creates that sort of boundary that, like, I won't ask you to do anything I wouldn't do.
That's, and again, I think that's very key for leadership. Period. Is
Yeah, and that's
delegation, not
through boundaries.
subservience. Right. That's the big
Right.
one, where it's like, well, yes, I would do this, but I cannot, because I can't be multiple places at once. That's the biggest
Right.
manifestation of leadership I've personally had to experience as well. It's like, well, I can't, so I must ask. But the boundaries are, we're talking about that. Let's go to the other type of boundary. I'm going to use the example of Captain Picard. Let's go ahead and go there, where
Okay.
there's this certain distance that needs to be maintained. So we're talking about leadership, but leadership has its own boundaries. So I want to extrapolate
Right.
on that, where yes, people like him, understand him, and all those bits. But compared to Kirk, where Kirk felt like he was in the trenches with everybody, Picard still kept that more aloof, almost pedestal nature to how he was represented on screen, right? Um,
Right.
and both were examples of good leaders, but it was just a different set where Kirk again his boundaries were more the Johnny Knoxville. I'm gonna do anything, not nothing I wouldn't do myself. Picard had this more like again figurehead style of leadership
Yeah.
where there was a different type of respect to it. It's not the guy you're going to go have drinks with. It's the guy that like inspires you to move forward. um, and I don't know, I just think that's interesting because they are different types of boundaries, again.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a Captain Kirk man
Mhm.
for sure. No disrespect to Picard, I
uh,
like him as well. But when push comes to shove, I'm a Captain Kirk man, and I definitely appreciate uh, that method. That's the kind of captain I would want. That's the kind of leader I would want. This one who I feel like is he could flex in his rank and be above us and just not be involved in things we're doing. He could just have let us handle that. But no, he's kind of like the everyman.
yes.
He is a captain, but he feels like a normal person. He's just another crewman. He's just another man on an adventure through space, just like
Yes.
you would be.
Yes, exactly. No, and I appreciate that. At the same time, again, I do appreciate that almost symbol like presentation of it, right? Where
Right.
again, where it's this, it's far more reserved because you have to again within boundaries. You have to close yourself off to different bits to maintain that illusion of a symbol, and we see it throughout the series and quite a few of the movies when that symbol breaks down and he becomes just the
Yeah.
man again, and that's also very unique. And I think that's when those boundaries are pushed. That's how we really get to resonate with the character, and how you can believe the crew would follow that is because they understand this and they appreciate the presentation, let's say, but at the same time they understand that that only has its limits. Um,
Right.
but let me see here. Let me see. Is there one here? Here's a good one. So this is the type of boundaries when I was looking at these quotes that kind of came up the most because particularly giving mentalities have difficulty setting boundaries, right? Very
Mhm.
easily to be used, right? And so this is by, I'm going to say Breen Brown, but it could be Brene Brown. I don't know this individual. And most of the quotes, and I was kind of talking before the recording here about how a lot of these really neat quotes are actually not attributed to anybody. So um, it's anonymous or unknown or what have you. And I just found that interesting. But anyway, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others.
Yeah.
And so that's the big one is understanding yourself. It's boundaries are once again a tool for understanding yourself better and being able to live and adjust and become a greater version of yourself. Because when you push those, and sometimes you're doing it intentionally, sometimes you're doing it unintentionally, you understand your capabilities at that time and you can adjust and work to grow on them. And in this case, yeah, that's can come off as selfish, but it's quite easy for people to be so selfless that their self just disintegrates and
Right.
they become incapable of carrying any additional burden because they took so much so quickly.
Yeah, and that kind of dissolves you as an individual as
Yes.
well if you just kowtow or whatever the term is, kowtow, uh, and don't separate yourself. And again, Picard, the line must be drawn here, this far, no further.
Yes.
Physical
Yes.
boundary, but very much a good example of creating boundaries, and that's tough, uh, especially in an artistic space.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that you see famous artists. I think they struggle with that because for various reasons. I guess one of them would be the artistic robbery that that they have to deal with, where they're expected to put out a certain type of product that is, it's like they get famous and then they just want them to keep doing this
Mm,
sort of
mm,
thing,
mm, mm.
and then that opportunity for creation and creativity and pursuing new ideas isn't really allowed. And so it takes a strong artist, it takes somebody with boundaries to say no, I'm not just gonna release another this type of album just
Yes.
because it was successful. No, I'm gonna do something I want to do, and I'm gonna do something with a different meaning or whatever it might be. And then there's also the struggle of boundaries with the audience, and this is just really just famous people
Yeah.
because for several reasons. Again, the audience expectations,
Yeah.
they might
Expectations.
want you to do the same thing, or they might want you to do something different. Maybe you did one album one way and the next album another way, and they're like, oh, this person changes it up. They'll keep doing that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you have to just do what you want to do to satisfy your own creativity and your own artistic needs. Um, and set those boundaries for yourself, while maintaining respect for yourself and for the people you're creating for. But I create for me first, and everybody else is secondary in that, and that's selfish, but that's an important boundary because I started creating because I loved it,
Yes.
and I want to keep loving it, and the way to do that is to respect myself.
Absolutely. And so I've got a quote on that, which is kind of the mirror of that, which is it's attributed to, I'm guessing it's a website or a publication called Sweatpants and Coffee. But pay attention when people react with anger and hostility to your boundaries. You have found the edge where the respect for you ends.
Ooh, ouch. That's a ooh.
So I like that one quite a bit because it's true. When you enforce a boundary in particular, that's when you really find out uh, when truth is revealed, honestly, and like people will accept
Right.
that boundary and then adjust to it if they were there for you, if they were there for whatever you were fulfilling for them, if they were there for them basically, then yeah, their ego gets attacked when it is. Of course, most responses to an ego attack is anger or hostility, passive aggressiveness, whatever. It's the grr, right? It's I'm being threatened kind of deal. And
Yeah.
anyway, I liked that quite a bit because that's the bit is, and we find that that manifests on the national scale, right? Boundaries, borders, those kind of bits you find very quickly that when you're enforcing something like that, whatever's on the other side is not always best pleased with that. Um, and again, that's just the nature of reality. Is one of those bits is enforcing where you end and they begin, and you have to find good
R-
ways to do that.
Right, and I think and that kind of this quote makes me think of, I don't know if this is the same idea, but it makes me think of this kind of way of phrasing this idea, is that like where your self respect begins is where, like, others' respect for you might end. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
It sounds like
Another
a similar. That's what it made me think of.
No, absolutely. So this is from Jenna Korf. If someone gets mad at you for creating a boundary, consider that a good sign that the boundary was necessary.
Right, exactly.
And that's it's massive. So for me, I've worked in caretaking most of my professional career in one form or another, and boundaries are unbelievably necessary to survival in that kind of work, particularly as any sort of empathetical individual, which is the kind of person you want in that kind of work. Um,
Yeah.
it will drain and destroy you because the need of the other in this world is so much greater than you. It is unfathomably greater than you in scale that to survive it and to actually participate in it as an action and as a to improve that situation little by little, you have to survive it, and setting those boundaries is wonderful. The main manifestation I've had to deal with is the concept of letting go, right? Instead of trying to
Hmm.
carry everything, trying to participate in everything, trying to do all these things, there's only so much you as a single individual are capable of. So you have to set those boundaries
Right.
for your survival. It's not because you don't want to help or you don't want to do these things to improve. It's because you're finite, and need
Right.
in this world is might as well be infinite compared to your scale, right? It's so unfathomably massive. So
There's something I've been
that's
saying
it.
a lot recently, is whether, because I have stresses maybe that I can't actively work on at the moment because they're just out of my active control, or maybe I'm waiting to hear about this or that. And so, what I've been saying a lot lately as sort of my mantra is there's only so much I can do.
Yep.
And that's a boundary I'm setting with myself about
Yes.
worrying and about
Yes.
stressing and about overly concerning myself with things that I can't control.
Yep.
And and I just realized this the other day, how much I've been saying it to myself. just when this problem pops up again or that problem pops up again, it's like, well, I've done what I can. There's only so much I can do.
Yep. No, and that's again a boundary as a tool. It's not
Yes.
closing yourself off. It's realizing where you currently stand in your ability and capability, and it is very much currently. Those boundaries can always be pushed, and sometimes they need to be. Sometimes you need to give far more of yourself than you're capable of at the time to find a result that actually is good for you. But far more often, it's the other way around, where you actually need to reel it in a little bit before it drains you entirely. We're not
Yeah.
Atlas. We cannot carry the whole world forever. It's just not possible.
You can push it to the limit
And
a
hopefully
little
that
bit.
grows your limit a little bit, and then the next time you can push it a little further, if that's what you desire to do. Sometimes that serves you, sometimes it doesn't. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and you don't. And again, like that quote said, I forgot who was it, who had said it, but if you don't push the limits, you don't really know where they are, and so you don't really know
yeah.
what you're capable of until you really push yourself. And that's definitely true. I mean, did you think you were capable of creating a comic book and doing this whole process and all these years of work that you've done? Did you think you were capable of that until you tried it?
uh, the arrogance of youth, a little bit, but no,
Right.
no. So
Well, that's important.
here's another quote of this one's attributed to nobody. It's anonymous. So you were telling me I should take credit. So I say
Just
right
go
now,
for it. Yes.
your
Credit is
current
yours.
safe boundaries were once unknown frontiers.
Yeah.
And that's the big one. And I think, as you were mentioning, now you're telling yourself, well, you can only do so much. I think this is
Right.
another tool that, as we get older and we have more experience behind our belt, we understand more. And we understand how to use it more correctly and with a far more precise and finessed approach to using it, right? When
Hmm.
we're teenagers or what have you, our boundaries can be very rigid and hard. Whether we're making them ourselves or discovering them, right?
Yeah.
And that's a source of great frustration for ourselves and those around us.
And a lot of teenage boundaries are very arbitrary.
Yes.
Both the ones that teenagers set for themselves and the boundaries that are set for them. And when teenagers
Yes.
realize that boundaries are arbitrary, oops,
Uh-huh.
that's cat's out of the bag. You've got problems.
Yep.
You know,
And
once you get that, your mom telling you no because.
hmm no, it's and that's the bit. It's just another one that you learn how to utilize correctly. But it's essential. It's one of the almost most essential that we've spoken about on this podcast for your own self preservation. Um,
Yes,
there's a
it's the
lot
you
that'll
know
keep you moving along that we've talked about. There's a lot that are carrots on sticks or that are healthily reinforcing and can reinvigorate you. This one protects you, and that's
yes.
a rarity to find something that is defensive in nature and very much malleable. Again, your boundary today may be essential and may be it may be a wall closing you off tomorrow. It's one
Right.
that you must be consistently adapting and figuring out what works and what's not. And there are going to be some very strong, hard boundaries that you've crossed once and figured out, yeah, no, that shouldn't go that far, and such. And those may last a lifetime, but there's a lot that'll just protect you in the moment, and then from there you have to consistently reevaluate and make sure they are still doing the job that they were put up for, and they're not standing in your way.
Yeah, and one important boundary for me, especially with my art, is I'm very careful of who I work with.
Mm,
Um, I I enjoy collaborating,
yes.
but it's really a lot about temperament, and I really have to read the individual carefully and have a good understanding of them before I decide to work with them on my art, because that's a very it's an intimate and
Yes.
vulnerable part of me. So if I'm going to let somebody into that world, I have to know that they're somebody who will respect it. Um, so that's a big boundary I have. So I'm very particular about who I work with, or at least who I bring in. I'm happy to go out and work with people in their worlds,
Yes.
step into their
Mhm.
world. But bringing people into my own world, that's that's tricky. I'm careful about that, and that's just in general, artistically and personally. I don't just invite people into my world
No,
willy nilly.
I'm very very similar in that. There's some things that I'm like, yeah, okay, and this I'm always open, and on other things like, yeah, no, I have to feel that. In particular, again, yeah, you said intimate. I need to feel mutual respect. That's the big one. I
Right.
have to understand that, and then be able to operate in whatever project or expression that we're trying to do together. I have to be able to understand what that respect is as well. So
Hmm.
that takes time and it takes consistency. That's a big one. Consistency
Yeah.
in action is what allows you to understand an individual. Consistency in words is not always backed up, um, but
Right.
consistency in action most certainly shows you one thing or another. And
And I think the most important thing to me,
yeah,
and something I have strived for, is consistency in temperament.
that's a hard one, depending on who you are.
Yeah. Right. Some people, and that's the thing. Some people are just volatile.
Yes.
You got a hair trigger, and those people are just really difficult to be around. I'm sure it would be difficult to be that way, but artistically, that's just really a no go for me. If there's a loose cannon, I can't have loose cannon aboard the ship.
For me, it depends on the boundaries of that loose cannon, right? Like, what can I expect it to do? Um,
Hmm.
but even then, like, I would much prefer consistency. Like, I
Right.
can adapt
That's
to a
the right
loose
call.
cannon that I can understand and apply
Right.
in its unique expression, but that's not preferable, particularly for a long a project or an endeavor that takes a prolonged period of time.
Right, and like I would step into the world briefly of a
Mhm.
loose cannon,
Uh-huh.
perhaps, and
That's the
work
bit.
within their world,
Yep.
but it's not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't invite that bull into my china shop.
That's the bit, and I'm with you
That's an
there.
important boundary for me. Is just taking care of my personal space, physically, mentally, spiritually, artistically, all of that. It's a very sacred space. I treat my world as though it's sacred
All
because
for
it
me.
is to
Oh,
me. And
oh,
there are
same.
some people who might not have realized that that's something, it's a boundary that should be created, is just protecting your world.
You can't build a garden in a tornado, right? You can't.
Yeah.
That's the bit. And so you need peace, you need order, you need harmony, you need predictability in at least some form to be able to even grow something. And that growth itself is going to usually be slightly unpredictable and need to be adapted to and whatever. But creating the space for it is what allows that. And of course, so for me again, peace, and in this case, in its relations to boundaries, because boundaries is that fence. It's the thing. It might be a gate on it or whatever to let folks in and out, but that's what allows it to go because everything around us is we had a podcast on that. If you guys want to take a look at our talk about chaos, but everything outside and even within is inevitably chaos, and it's not evil or dark by nature chaos, but it is by its definition uncontrollable. So you need to
I,
find a way to find a space where again you can at least start to grow something. You can plant that seed, and
that's a
that's what boundaries
perfect
for.
segue into this poem I just remembered that I written.
Hey, there you
It's an
go.
old poem. This is from back in June 19th of last year.
There you go.
It's called Indifferent Souls. What good is a wall that you let others climb? What good is a gate that you open for all? What good is a garden trampled by indifferent souls?
There you go. No, exactly. Exactly what I was getting at. It's boundaries again. It's a tool, and this one. So there's a quote from Henry Cloud. I'm not familiar with this individual either, but setting boundaries inevitably involves taking responsibility for your choices. You are the one who makes them. You are the one who must live with their consequences, and you are the one who may be keeping yourself from making the choices you could be happy with. And so
Interesting.
so you need to have gates on those boundaries so that you can at least look outside and see if it's actually worth, oh, maybe I can push the wall out a little further and have a bit more space and there's better soil there and all of
Right.
that. Or maybe it's time like, oh, they're at the gates, I actually need to reinforce this. It's important to be able to not get lost in your personal boundaries, but also make sure that you are checking up on them. I talked about that earlier. It's adaptability. It's good for many to be rigid about, many of those boundaries to be rigid, ones that you can count on and understand and that are necessary to your growth. But there are also many that will, you could put a way too short ceiling on yourself, right, to protect you from the rain and never even
Yeah.
notice that there's a bright sun up there now and not rain. um,
Right.
it's important to live in the moment. That's the big one, is be able to reevaluate it based on where you are now, not where you were then. um, and it might be very similar, but nonetheless it's important to keep open to it and not say that this is a forever thing. Again, there's quite a few that might need to be a forever thing because of a lesson you had figured out, but still be open to that changing, I guess.
Yeah, and well, this makes me think of there's another aspect of boundaries that I felt we should approach and
Oh.
talk about. And this is the idea of working within boundaries, forced
Mm.
boundaries, typically because of access to tools or times. You have this much time, but the natural boundaries that are created, that we have to work within. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest one that comes to mind, and I think you already said it, was time. That's the biggest
Yes.
one. That one, like, you don't know what it is, you can't actually see it, but you can see its manifestations in in many other places, right? You can see
Right.
degradation. Hell, you feel it every day with your own erosion of self, and your own growth. Time manifests in so many different forms, but it is a hard boundary. I guess maybe time itself isn't the hard boundary so much as death is the hard boundary. Um, but
Right.
but
Well,
they're very closely related.
right. But I'm going smaller scale.
Okay.
And this is what I mean. This is and I may have brought this up before, but there's always the boundaries of your limitations at
Yes.
the time.
Yes.
So for me, early on, it's just when you're trying to make music, it's the limitation of, well, what can you record on? What
Mm-hmm.
machinery do you have access to record? Especially if you don't have a budget to pay a studio, which is expensive. So there are a lot of people who, and I don't want to reiterate this point too much because I have spoken about this before. But the idea is that you work with the tools you have at the time and make the best of what you have at the time. I've worked my way up through technologies. I've had like little 4-track tape recorders that I've worked with, and then I've moved on to digital recorders, and then I finally got a program on my computer where I could record and just slowly worked my way up. But I was always working within those boundaries. And the beautiful thing about boundaries is that it causes you to be more imaginative. It causes you to think creatively and work around problems in a way that you would not if you had access to everything. It's the difference between 1977 Star Wars and current day Michael Bay Transformers. George Lucas and his team, they were making things that had never been made before. They had never put these images on screen. Some of these things had never been achieved. So it was a matter of thinking of ways to achieve this goal. They were working within boundaries, and the creativity that came out of that, it stood the test of time. Whereas nowadays you have all these CGI nightmares where it's just, oh, how are we going to do this? Oh, we'll just slap it together in a computer. Not that it's slapped together. There are people who work very hard on that, but it lacks that creativity. It lacks that finding what you have around and putting it together to make it happen and make something interesting and maybe a little bit ugly, but also very unique
Well,
because it was
I
built
would
within those
I
boundaries.
would say the relation between what boundaries and in this manifestation, a more accurate word I'd say is constraint, right? It's what's pushing down on you that can make you stronger. When you're lifting weights, the constraint is gravity, right? It's the weight in your hand, sure, but it's also the fact that that weighs anything because of gravity. Um, it's constraint or boundaries as constraint where you're working in a artistic medium are extremely useful for growing stronger, growing bigger, growing something, growing. Period. And I 100% agree. Your limitations are what allow you to grow. If you weren't limited, you would have no place to go, right?
Right.
And so I totally agree, and I think that those manifestations in cinema, but in any artistic medium, and we've seen it many different places. That's what did it, right? Is people like, oh well, this is a conventional comic. Let's do this because we can fuck with time. There's a wonderful comic, I forgot what it's called, but the whole idea is playing with time, space time. And it's just one character going through a bunch of different panels and realizing that they're in the previous panel, and then you go to this panel, and it actually leads you back up to where you were, and just messing with that. And that's something that as a medium, comics are really really good at. Whereas cinema, it's still going to present it linearly. No matter what it's doing, it's still very linear. Um, Pieces of art, in particular expressionist art, where the constraint was whatever that person was feeling and wanted to literally, in some cases, literally spew onto a canvas or into whatever sculpture or whatever medium they're trying to do. Uh, that limitation of what was thought of to be art at that point is what was constraining them, and then breaking out of it expanded that boundary. But that constraint, if that constraint wasn't there, whatever they manifested wouldn't be of any, I'm not going to say any significance, but any significance greater than what had come before. Um, and we'll see that again and again in any medium. Again, if the constraints of practical effects up to Star Wars weren't what they were, Star Wars would not have been impressive, right? What they did
Right.
to push it, the what the boundaries were set, and that's the thing is sometimes boundaries inspire you to climb over them and discover more. Sometimes they keep you pinned down. We see that in science in particular. Uh, where the boundaries become very, very rigid and people accept them for what they are and they don't push them. And so great stagnation occurs, and the same
Right.
ideas get repeated again and again and again. And it takes mad scientists to be able to look at it in a different way, push it, reconstrain it, and then bring it into previous understanding so that the boundary got pushed and the greater boundary around that school of thought, and you'll see it a lot in philosophy, gets expanded, right? Um, and that's that's super 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 important. Again, it was adaptability that allows us to grow, and you can't adapt if there's nothing to adapt to.
And I just had a thought while you were speaking. Um, is that knowledge itself is a boundary?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go into a field and you don't know anything about it, and maybe you're throwing your 2 cents in, like if you're working with somebody and they're building something and you have no knowledge of building, you might throw out an idea that is just so off the wall because you have no knowledge of how this works, so you have no constraints mentally
Yes.
in within the subject, so you're not thinking within those boundaries, that you might come up with the solve because you're thinking outside the box.
Yep.
And so that's just an interesting thought to me, because the idea is, or the you would think that having great knowledge about something destroys boundaries, and just it's just this influx of information, you know everything about it and you can fully wrap your head around it. But I think that can cause boundaries because you're so caught up in what you know, or what you think
Exactly.
you know.
So there's a great bit, and I don't know. Have you seen the animated Doctor Strange movie, Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme? I think it was called. It's from way
Years
back when.
ago.
Okay, so in that version of the story, and honestly, a lot of what Doctor Strange's ethos, the reason he exists, is because he got over the boundaries of what he thought was right. That's the big bit.
Right.
But in that animated movie, how the Ancient One gets him through that is by having him build this wall, and he tells him until the wall is completed, you can't build a boundary, quite literally. Until he builds that, he won't take him further in his training, right? So every day, Doctor Strange with his fucked up hands is out there building this wall. And then he comes back in the morning and the wall's gone and all the bricks are back to where they go. And so he, of course, gets frustrated at that boundary that he keeps building up. And it takes a while until he realizes that there is kind of the Neo thing is as well. There is no spoon. There is no wall. And that's when he figures out that, his hands are fucked up, but they don't have to be, because he's limiting himself to a mental construct of what the human form is instead of a reality of what existence is, I guess is the best way to put it. He hasn't stepped beyond his physical yet. And so the way the H1 got him to that is literally building a boundary, building a wall with his hands, with his fucked up hands, until he realizes that he doesn't need to build that wall. He just needs to understand that that wall doesn't exist. that is just this repeated cycle. And in the Matrix, it's very similar. It's the simple understanding that there is no spoon. It's that idea of we place so many boundaries that are just accepted and that we don't ever adapt to or think about until we realize that they're constraining us, that they're stopping us. And at that point, we actually stop and look at them. And sometimes there's ways around them, sometimes there's not. Mortality is one we have spent our almost probably entire existence trying to get around. But that's a boundary. It's a very hard boundary. There's the boundary of your own capabilities that we spend our entire lives adjusting, adapting, and growing to. There's all these amazingly important boundaries that again are there. There's the carrot on the stick, and there's the rod, or whatever that's called, the rod or the whatever. There's two ways that those boundaries can get you. They either inspire you to climb over them, or they piss you off and get you to smash through them. But either way, again, it without them, growth would be, I don't want to say impossible. I don't like to limit imagination to that, but it would be far less straightforward.
Yeah, growth is difficult without challenges, without things
Yes.
to overcome.
Yes.
And that's actually something that Captain Kirk speaks about
Oh, there
in
we
the
go.
episode with the companion, which is the episode where they land on this planet. I forgot how they get there, what circumstances, but they're stranded there essentially. Spock, Kirk, McCoy. Maybe there was some red shirts, but they didn't last. And they're on this planet, and Zefram Cochrane is there,
Oh, okay,
and
okay, okay.
and they're blown away because he's supposed to be dead. This is the father of warp drive. He lived, hundreds of years before they did, and he's been there surviving with this gaseous kind of cloud called the companion. And what this companion does is it gives him sustenance and it keeps him alive. There's scenes where the companion envelops him and he's sort of rejuvenated. And Captain Kirk, this is when they actually come up with the universal translator, so that Spock just whips it up out of some stuff they had from the Galileo, and Kirk's actually able to speak to the companion, and he tells him, he's like, men need challenges to overcome. We need things in front of us. That's how we grow. That's how we live. We need things to live for. And essentially, he's convincing this companion that Zefram Cochrane has a non-life on this planet because everything's given to him. Every need is met, and that's no way for people to live.
And we've seen that a lot, manifest in different ways, because of course we want to, the Star Trek universe is a great bit of it where they've solved all the basic needs for their people, right? Basic needs have different rigidities and different definitions, but let's say food, water, survival, they have completely solved
Shelter.
that. Shelter, exactly. They've completely solved that theoretically. Of course, there's many, in particular, that don't jive with that, but within that, they redefine the boundaries. Right, the boundaries used to be that, and we deal with that as well in this particular civilization quite a bit as well, where most of our stuff is so much easier to deal with that now we fill our time with a lot of stuff is nonsense. But we still have that capability that we've been, instead of working hard to survive and adapt and all of that, the challenges, a lot of the challenges are now far more abstract. Some are wonderful abstractions to work at, right? Like what we're doing right now, art in particular, expression. I think that's a beautiful one to work at. In Star Trek, they do that. They also do exploration as a big one, right? They free them up to explore and to communicate and diplomacy and all these different boundaries and challenges. But imagine again if that's also taken away, which a lot of our civilization actually suppresses exploration and diplomacy and intercommunication and the realities of it, or if it doesn't suppress it, it redefines them into a far less true version of themselves. Again, I think you used the term a mirror. A lot of it's a falsehood that looks
Right.
like it, but is not really worth it. Not really a truth. A lot of illusions, and many boundaries are
Yeah.
illusions. And as I was talking about the
Right.
Sorcerer Supreme bit, it was a complete illusion. Once he accepted that that
Well,
wasn't something worth his time, it disappeared. Um, that's the
and we
bit.
were speaking earlier about like sometimes it's important to break boundaries,
Yes.
and so and this Star Trek another good example, because there are several times in the original series and definitely later on too, but they were governed by the Prime Directive, which is
Yes.
not to interfere with any society that hasn't achieved light faster than light travel, something like that.
Yeah.
And there are many times where Kirk and
In
Picard
particular,
broke that
yes.
rule, and for good reasons, and we agreed with them typically. I know I did. And then there are times when they could have used their power, their greater technology, to get what they want for evil. In And we were just talking about mirrors in the very famous episode Mirror Mirror.
Hmm.
Kirk and the crew are on this planet, and they're trying to diplomatically get these people to give them dilithium crystals because they need them for their ship. But the crystals are sacred to these people. They're a holy object. And so they can't just give them away. So they tell them no. And while they're speaking, there's a storm going on in the atmosphere. There's like an ion storm. And Kirk's about to beam up with his party. And the leader of this group on the planet, he says, well, Captain, you have superior weapons. You could always force us to give you the crystals. And Kirk says, but we won't. And so there's the boundary on the opposite end,
Yep.
not exerting his power or the force of the Enterprise to take what they wanted. No, the diplomacy was there. And usually when those boundaries were broken, it was out of to protect or to save lives or to help.
And that's and honestly, Star Trek in general uh, loved to, and I'm going to use the past tense because I haven't watched much of the new, but loved to throw that dichotomy of, well, this is right and has proven right again and again, versus this is the situation now, and it's on actual people in the moment to decide these things and to set their own
Mm-hmm.
personal values and to choose it. I mean, that's the whole point of a captain, or within Star Trek, is to be the person making that choice, right? To bear that weight. And of course, wonderful council of advisors in every case,
Right.
the crew and all of that, but it is at the end on one person. And there's many times, like one of the bigger boundaries with Next Generation is when they make a deal with the Cardassians. They finally agree for that ceasefire. So it's for the Bajor to liberate Bajor and all these things. And they find that, and this creates the Maquis, which in history were the French resistance, but in Star Trek it's the human resistance. It's these settlers that are now in quote unquote Cardassian space. It was forfeited without their actual input or their ability to make that decision. So of course they're going to fight for their homes. In particular, they did a wonderful set of episodes, which also gets rid of Wesley Crusher, which is nice. That had to deal with Native Americans who had resettled a new planet, and it had become their new Mother Earth, and had become their new spiritual center for I think 100 years. They were looking for a planet with these specific guidelines, and they finally found it, and they had finally started settling it and growing it, and of course it ended up on the other side of that arbitrary border. And it was up to Picard to decide to either remove them again, like has been done throughout history consistently, or do anything to change that and try and convince the Cardassians to leave them be. And I think where they end up on that one is Picard just leaves them to fight for themselves. It was the best that he
Mm,
could do. It's like
right.
I
Gave the
won't
choice to them.
yeah, I won't forcefully remove it, but you are left on your own. So if the Cardassians want to come get you, I can't do anything. Um, And that was I think that's where they left it. Of course, there's a whole subplot where Wesley Crusher becomes a spiritual being just so they can get rid of him. But it's one of those moral quandaries again that they had to find it had to do with a boundary in many different levels. Like, this is as far, I'm not going to remove people, it's in my historical bit, and they brought that up. It's like, I bet you're here to make a different decision than your ancestors did. One of the natives were telling him. It had a bunch of different boundaries where it was a growth of society having to once again make a very, very difficult decision. um, as harsh as we were to the natives here, it probably still wasn't an easy decision. Um, Whether or not it had a clear outcome that was going to be decided, no matter what, it was not an easy decision. And expanding those, what was the big one? It was Manifest Destiny. We had a very specific set of borders until we did, right? Until we grew past them, and then we had to deal with what was on the other side of those one way or another. And that manifests in a lot of different ways, and not all of them good. We've spoken a lot about the good bit of boundaries, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's no good
Well,
end
and
of
there
it.
are a lot of times where there are maybe boundaries that you set because well, maybe something happened, and
Yes,
with this particular instance, and you set a boundary because of that, and it really cuts you off from a lot of great things in the future, a lot of great experiences, maybe great relationships with others, and that's tricky. So I think it is one of these things that needs to be checked up on, and if it needs to be reaffirmed, great, reaffirm it. But there's always options. There's time to reassess
absolutely.
opportunities for that.
This is a quote from Tara Brock. Tara Brack. The boundary to what we can accept is the boundary to our freedom.
The boundary to what we can accept
Is the boundary to
is
our
the
freedom.
boundary to our freedom. Huh.
And that makes sense to me.
Interesting.
I mean, if you can accept killing somebody, then your freedom's much, much greater, correct? If you can't accept that, then it's a little lesser, but you were still free to choose that. Um,
My thoughts were immediately of tyranny,
oh, okay.
what we're willing to accept.
That's also true.
It's that's our freedom. Like we accept, if we accept a totalitarian, government, that's going to that's going to affect our freedom.
Yeah, it's an
So what we
externally
accept,
enforced boundary, right? And
right?
there are many of those. Again, like a lot of what we've talked about, it's key to the relationship between self and other, right? And other is just as effective at shaping, manipulating, or constraining us as the self is. And that's the bit. Is very
And
true.
so, what are your thoughts about maintaining safe boundaries and important boundaries, especially in a world that it seems to not really want us to have them for ourselves?
Oh, well, I think it's just naturally we are built constrained into a body, into a mind, into an intelligence, into a soul, right? All these different things that are some theoretically unlimited. You certainly have a allotted, well, maybe not allotted, but a time space to experience it within. But nonetheless, I mean, it's essential to survival for one, understanding what it is and what you're willing to again accept or not accept. I think it's essential. But this particular civilization is exceedingly insecure. I always use the term that it wants to put everybody in boxes so it can pretend to understand everything, so it can pretend to control everything, so that it feels secure. It's exceedingly insecure. Nothing's more
Right.
insecure than
To
evil.
put you in a boundary.
Yes, and nothing's more insecure than darkness, because it takes very little light to completely destroy it. Um, and so well, what is it? There's a great George Orwell quote where it's like, they fear love because it's something they cannot control, or it creates a
Oh,
world they
nice.
cannot control. I think that's what it is, George Orwell. It's from 1984. Um,
That's what I figured.
and it's 100% true. Again, darkness is insecure because it knows itself very well, and it believes all to be itself. It's lost in ego. And so within ourselves, we have our shadows and the manifestations of that darkness. And so if you're able to look within and understand that darkness, it's a lot easier to look without and understand it as well. Um,
Right.
very much mirrors reflections. There's so many different wise men that say, what you perceive the world to be is what it is, and that perception
That's a
is
fact.
within self, right? So
That's a fact.
it's the more self discovery you can do that is honest and true and often very difficult. The
And
more
open,
that's a big one too, and sometimes very
but
loving
not
and
too
nutritious.
open so that you're completely malleable.
Well, I forgot
Like
who
you're
said this one too, but
you're not
have an
being
open mind. Oh, I think it's a Carl Sagan quote actually. Keep your mind open, but not so open that your brain falls out.
right.
And that's the big one, right? Again, you still have to have your center. You have to have your boundaries to push forward from and explore outside of, but you still need the safe place that is defined and personal and again your garden to grow stuff within before you go out there. You can't just wandering uh, without sustenance, without a place to go and gain sustenance to gain your strength from. You will be destroyed
And
by
there
the
again,
chaos out there.
that's the sacred place,
Yes,
and that we all need that within, without. We need it. We
yes.
need a sacred place to preserve ourselves, to replenish ourselves, as you said.
And to go back to what you were saying about the external forces on that, again, they are terrified of those sacred places because they cannot enter them, so they want to destroy them. And so again, we've had all these different manifestations, and these most of them, to be fair, are Faustian bargains. As we talk about acceptance, it's a big one. Most of these things are simply because we accept them, not because they're actually externally enforced. It's because we agree with
Mm,
them. It's because we comply with them. It's because we give our energy and
right.
our acceptance again to them. It's not so much that
Go
there's
along.
actually there's they sure they imply the idea of a gun to your head, but that gun is not to your head. It would take a lot to get there. And even then, the more that didn't accept it, the more guns they need, and they will run out of them. Metaphorical guns, let's say. That's the big push to AI as well, is because it's a lot easier for them to comb through these sacred places and find what they don't like within them, and then justifiably, in their opinion, destroy them. But it's very important to set those boundaries. With social media in particular, you need to set a boundary to it. Some people I have seen get destroyed by it because it becomes them, right? Their mirror becomes the self instead of something to look into and maybe gain an insight here and there so that you can personally reflect, not externally reflect. And it's rough. It's a hard place to be in. I couldn't imagine being a kid in it. I know it's come up many times, but it's something I think about quite often. Is that because,
Yeah.
again, I work with animals in addition to working in art and stuff, and they don't worry about any of that illusion. Right, there's nothing there, and so it allows me to engage on that honest level consistently, and it's very important to my
Mm.
sacred place, to my existence, to be able to engage in that honest, true,
And
real level.
and for me, that's a lot of what music is. It's
Yes.
me engaging with that place and expressing those feelings and those thoughts that come from that place.
And yeah, the bound they they want to destroy all boundaries so that they can keep prompting their own and building their own and trying to push you into that so that your framework starts there. And that's what I worry about when young people are first exploring and finding these boundaries. The definitions that they're given could be very, very twisted compared to when I was growing up. And even when I was growing up, they were probably pretty fucking twisted. It's just we adapt and grow around them and grow in between them, and try and exist within this, again, the boundary set by other. And the other I'm seeing these days, but it's also a widened perception as I got older, is far crueler than the one I dealt with. Now, it's always been cruel, but it's been a fair kind of cruel. If you go all the way back to, caveman days, bad things can happen to you, but you had a very defined set of, like, this is what you need to do to survive. And now there's all these
Right.
additional levels and layers and games and, honestly, illusions that are placed
Right.
upon us to survive within a civilization instead of within a reality. That's part of reality now. Absolutely, it's just a it's one I believe we'll adapt to, but it's going to be as it's always been, quite a hell of a lot of growing pains.
Agreed.
to push through those boundaries, right? To push down those walls, to extend them and
Or to
redefine
put
them.
up boundaries against them,
Yep, that's the big one too.
not just not let these things in that you don't agree with.
Exactly, and it's hopefully getting that experience young will do the opposite to what it could do, which is again to set your definitions. The well, as a government governmente mind control, right? That's the bit is to guide something so that something that's far greater than any almost single organization could ever actually control, an amount of chaos that is unfathomable, and to actually try and steer it simply through implication. That's the whole reason propaganda exists as a concept. Is just a little bit, but it's also propaganda is just the evil application of art. Um, Art in itself is allows us to illuminate and chop down paths for others in a lot of ways that actually can expand their boundaries instead of enforcing one outside of it, which is it's neat. It's neat. I appreciate participating in art quite a bit.
As do I.
So we are hitting the hour mark. Do we have any final thoughts on boundaries?
Boundaries have served me well with as far as limitations and boundaries within my access to tools to create music. That has served me well.
Mm,
Boundaries I have put in place in my personal life and my professional life, those have served me well. And I have good things to say about boundaries, and I've experienced the negative uh, ramifications of boundaries that were set um, for those who didn't respect them. And when you encounter someone who will, those boundaries could get in the way, not because they shouldn't be there, but your perception of them might be an issue. Whereas, so somebody could be being a normal person and functioning in your life in a caring and respectful way, but you've created these boundaries for others, and these people aren't even encroaching on them, but you're so sensitive about them that you kind of project this fantasy that they are disrespecting these boundaries, or encroaching too much on those boundaries. So boundaries are perception is a huge part of boundaries. And so that's a lot. That's not a great summary of things, but it's just a matter of controlling your perceptions, understanding your perceptions of boundaries, using them to your advantage, but also knowing when they are screwing you over.
yeah, no,
Again, I think it is a tool.
yep, it's a tool. Most all of these, if you're walking alongside them instead of trying to force them to be one thing or another, it's a far greater learning experience and growth opportunity. Um, Boundaries for me, again, I think constraint is both an opportunity to grow and to push forward, as well as it can be holding you down, a boot on your neck, right? Again, to go to Orwell, what greater boundary than the foot stamping on a human face for eternity, right? That's the ultimate boundary they want to put up. It's a hell of a thing. Again, you need to understand them. You need to set your own personal ones, but at the same time, you need to understand the ones that are illusions. You need to understand the ones that are actual defenses, the ones that are standing in your own way and keeping you from growth. And all of that is honestly self awareness as well as exterior
Self
awareness,
reflection.
self reflection. Um, Boundaries are incredibly important. Whether they're good or bad, they're incredibly important. It's something you should be aware of and not take for granted. That's the big one. If most of these giants that we spoke about, if you take them for granted, they will run your life or destroy you. If you actually engage with them in a respectful manner, again, you'll walk with them, you'll be good. At least you'll be moving forward instead of stagnating. That's the big thing that boundaries can do to you is they can force you to stagnate till you suffocate. Uh, and there's a lot that are implied that are simply illusions that really constrain people. and there's some that are implied and are not illusions, and that you need to adjust to simply because they're reality. But either way, you need to understand them. It's another one where you need to take time and respectfully engage with the concept instead of again taking them for granted. I want to thank folks for joining us on this one. This is our first pre-recorded To Walk with Giants. I think it's probably going to be a better format. We redid the video. Well, check it out. Give us your thoughts. See if there's anything else we can do, particularly audio levels. Just little things that we would like to be more precise and to expand our boundaries and make sure that we are aware of them, because you're not always aware of your own boundaries. And sometimes you need an exterior eye to point them out. It's like, oh, well, I can't see through that. I don't know how you don't see it at all, but it's there. And then you're like, oh, that. But anyway, I want to thank folks for that. Let us know. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on boundaries, so put those in the comments. If you're watching this during the premiere, let us know in there. We certainly want to hear that. Please let us know other giants you'd like us to talk about. And yeah, I'm Cody Fernandez with Ironverse Comics. You can check out all of my work on ironversecomics.com, as well as my team's work. And as always, I want to thank the wonderful Laguna Munta for joining me in this. And yeah, where can they find your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad we can do this. This is always fun. And if you want to check out my music, you can look me up on Bandcamp, Laguna Munta, just like it is on screen. And you can listen to my singles or a couple albums I have on there, and keep your eye out for something new in the future.
Oh.
And you can follow me on the major platforms under the same name, spelled just the same.
All right, folks, thank you so very much. And we will catch you next time where we'll be talking about some other giant. All right. Adios, amigos.
Thanks.